Welcome to this webinar using accreditation to help embed continuous improvement. So my name's Simon Elias. I'm Director of the Lean Competency System, and the purpose of this session is to outline why and how accreditation can play an important role, an important supportive role in the quest to establish and sustain a continuous improvement culture. So that's the focus of this session. We've got a sort of a sister webinar to this, which is more technical on how to become accredited, which we also run. We've been sending some more dates for next year soon. So this will be about 45 minutes. You can ask questions at the end. We've got a comments feature in via chat, so please, if you want to add anything there, please do. We can do a couple of polls if there's enough people to answer them, just to add a bit of interactivity, and we'll circulate these slides after the session, and we will record this and put it on the website as well. So we're going to basically just to do a bit of brief background about the Lean Competency System, and then really get into the factors to enable and sustain CI. I'm going to introduce something called the enabler jigsaw as a mechanism just to structure the session, and briefly talk about how you become accredited. Then we'll summarize at the end. We're going to also have some questions. Okay, just to start off, a bit of background about the Lean Competency System, which was created in the Lean Enterprise Research Centre at Cardiff University. Essentially, around the turn of the century, there was a lot of lean training growth as the ideas around lean were taken up by organizations. The centre had been formed just in the mid-1990s, and it was clear there was no qualifications framework to help support organizations and individuals. So we set about looking at some alternatives to this and came up with a framework in around 2004-05, piloted and sort of launched it to the community from 2005, and it grew steadily. It was sort of something we put on the shelf, didn't promote it too proactively, but it seemed to be popular. Then in about 2012, we thought it had potential and worked out a strategy to see if we could develop and exploit it. And by 2014, we came up with a plan, which was to create a company which holds the university license to manage and develop the LCS. So that's really how we've evolved, and I'm now fully engaged with that organization. So that's what it's all about in terms of where we came from, and essentially we now provide accreditation for organizations and certification for individuals, largely through accredited organizations, and then a growing community for ongoing learning and professional development. I always like to focus on sort of what's the main proposition, what solution does the LCS offer, and it's really about, if you want for an organization that wants its training, continuous improvement training accredited and endorsed, that's a key offer. For an organization that wants its staff to be rewarding and recognized for their knowledge, capability, commitment, this has become increasingly important over the past 15 years or so, I think. Reassurance that its training is robust, technically sound and well managed. Also that wants a flexible university developed CI qualification framework. And finally, a universal standard that is adopted widely. So that's essentially what we set out to do. I think the staff recognition reward has probably become more important over its period. And we've grown now to pretty much global coverage. It's been delivered, LCS training, accredited training being delivered all over the world, either directly by accredited organizations or consultants working on behalf of clients. And we've got a pretty diverse range of customers covering all sectors: public, private sectors, third sectors, small, large. So it's a pretty broad group, which indicates obviously the popularity of lean. It's spread to almost every sector. So that's just a bit about the background to the LCS. Turning to sustaining and embedding CI, I think what we're going to start with is a question. I know there's not many here at the moment, but we can still have a go. And essentially, I want to want you to think, what is the biggest factor in lean failure? So I'm going to launch a short poll now. You've got options to choose from. One of 4 options. What's the biggest factor? Poor communication, poor consultation, poor leadership, or poor methodology there. So if you want to just click one that you think might be the answer there. Okay. Okay, we've got, I think everyone's had a go. Let's just have a look at the results. We've got one of you's talked about poor communication. The other 2 have gone for poor leadership. I mean, obviously a lot of these are linked. But if we look at some research we did around sustainability, it was a PhD student's work on the 10 reasons for lean failure. And if you look at this was sort of ranked in order of importance, and the sort of leadership one and vision became the top one, closely followed by communication. So those of you who just answered that were pretty on the button there. But a whole range of factors became the reasons why lean wasn't working, because clearly there was evidence that people were trying this, but they weren't able to get it going. They couldn't engage people, and they couldn't sustain it. So this became an important piece of research around the time, which began to develop a template of how you've got to go about lean if you want to successfully stay lean, as this book says, and sustain it. But clearly, leadership, whether that's vision, support, was a major important factor. There's also many other things as well. It's largely soft factors that came out in the research, not so much the hard factors why lean didn't seem to work. And this book, Staying Lean, had in it a nice image, the lean iceberg, in which essentially this was trying to depict the sustainable lean management system. And it had this idea of the iceberg, which is in water. Obviously, the stuff above the waterline is the hard stuff you can see and touch, almost the sort of visible stuff, tools, technology, the process management. But below the waterline were all the enabling factors, and then below the waterline, because you couldn't see them, and there often were all these softer things: strategy, alignment, leadership, behavior, and engagement. And this was at the time, it seems obvious now, but at the time it wasn't obvious. You've got to address these elements if you're going to create a sustainable lean management system. It's not just a question of using a few tools and techniques and managing processes. And obviously, when the this idea of lean management really came about, of this is what lean management was, addressing these factors. And the LCS came about this time. We developed, and it was largely about what tools and techniques do people need to have in order to manage processes. And this was its initial focus, but it soon became clear that actually it had a role in the whole below the waterline stuff in terms of behavior, engagement, particularly. So that's how it developed, and it became accepted that you had to address this factor really first on an ongoing basis if you're going to sustain your lean effort. So what I've done now, I've created what I'm calling the Sustainability Enablers Jigsaw, just as a mechanism to illustrate this. So I'm taking some of the negatives then to turn them into positives, and said if you're going to sustain your continuous improvement effort, you've got to address these sort of factors. And I've added 2 others, which I think is important, which also help sustainability. One is contingent continuous improvement approach, which essentially means you've got to develop a version of lean that suits your environment, and not rather than a prescriptive approach, and be also very flexible, and a flexible, adaptable accreditation approach, which takes account of the only approach that you've taken. So this is the sustainability jigsaw, and essentially I want to just go through the jigsaw and say, well, how does LCS accreditation relate to this? So what bits of the jigsaw, if you like, does accreditation help put in place? So let's start off. I mean, I've talked about this contingent approach to lean. I think this wasn't on the original list, but it's something in the center that we soon realized was important, because there's no one specific interpretation of what lean is. There's some broad principles around which most people agree, but then there's lots of different tools, models you can use which align to those principles. So contingent simply means you've got to develop a lean approach that's very dependent on your circumstances, on your situation, the processes and the markets that you're in. So it's about developing a model that works in your environment, because that really maximizes the chance that you're going to get it right, and it helps this using the inappropriate sort of one-size-fits-all approach, which we've often seen, where someone comes in a particular model that worked well in one organization or one context, but then tries in another and it doesn't work. So it's critical that you get this idea of developing a way that's going to work for you. And I think the whole LCS model encourages accredited organizations to develop their own version of continuous improvement, and make it contextualized and bespoke. So it's certainly non-prescriptive. It encourages you to find your own version, and the framework is flexible and adapts to different operation models. That's the key thing. It's not about you've got to follow a prescriptive model that we lay down. It's about we look at your model and say, yes, the framework can adapt and flex around that. So that, I think, is an important part of sustainability, is developing your own approach that works for you. And I think that that comes from as well our own interpretation of lean. Again, I mean, we use the word lean thinking. There's lots of other phrases and terms that people use, and I think that can cause issues. But for us, lean is the term we've used because we came from the Lean Enterprise Research Center. But you may use other terms on this. And as I said, we believe there's some core underlying principles that are pretty much acceptable. Lots of supporting models and tools. Hence this contingent approach that you will use to select which of these models and tools are going to work in your world. The other thing is we refer to lean as open source now, where I think it's been developed by the market and the community. So it's a dynamic and evolving body of knowledge as people find different methods and approaches that fit in and align to these core principles. So we've got a very much holistic system perspective of lean, and eclectic. It comes from lots of different sources. So that once you accept that sort of agnostic approach to lean, the whole accreditation philosophy becomes non-prescriptive, an adaptable model to allow to fit into the model that organizations will create for themselves. Very much a devolved responsibility. So this accreditation model doesn't define quality. It allows the customer to be the arbiter of quality. Because it'll be different in different contexts, and we're what called outcomes based. So we're not specific in prescribing a particular capability. It's about you delivering a capability of knowledge and practice and deciding how you're going to get there. So this is very much a disruptor model of accreditation, bottom up, if you like, and accommodates the ideas around the learning organization. So the whole philosophy is about being flexible and adaptable to your accreditation approach, and this contingent word is the way we describe it. So that's that piece of the jigsaw. That a structured methodology and project management was one piece of the jigsaw. Now, what the LCS offers is a 7-level framework covering all parts of the organization, from shop floor to boardroom, organized in these 3 groups: fundamental, technical, and strategic. And it provides competency in terms of our understanding. It's got 2 dimensions: knowledge and application. So there's an expectation that everyone at this level will be able to know something and do something once they've been through an LCS accredited course, and they have to be demonstrated, apart from 1A, which is just about awareness. But this provides a structured method and a route map for those who want to move along up the pyramid and gain greater levels of competency. So the framework allows this for some structured method and project management in terms of how you implement your training, also how you decide who is going to need what level of competency. So one key decision is deciding what levels of competency do different staff require in your organization so that the whole strategy can be implemented and sustained. And this is about, again, providing structured methodology. It's also about mobilizing change champions. So you're giving people an opportunity to develop skills and capability. And this will differ from organization to organization. So in this particular example, you've got particular roles, and you will decide that the frontline people would need to have a level 1 capability, and team leaders might go up to level 2, senior people will be level 3. So it allows you to get everybody engaged in the process and get them mobilized in as actually being change champions. There are certain people who will be specific change champions, but in a lean organization, we want everyone to be a continuous improver, and this structure allows everybody to have at least a basic level of understanding and capability, which will help create this movement and this momentum. So in this way, accreditation helps in this mobilization, and it provides the sort of structure and project management framework to allow that to happen. And I think one of my favorite sort of lean images is this one, taking this idea that in a lean organization, everyone is a continuous improver. We want to get in a position where all roles have got in the organization are doing some strategic input or activity. They're all involved in improvement, and there's sort of the day job. So, you know, typically you want your operators to be doing mainly sort of operational stuff, but improvement should be part of their role, and they should have some role also in the strategic direction. Similarly, senior people, mainly strategic role, but they're involved in improvement, and obviously a small amount of the sort of standard stuff. So that's the often called the Kaizen flag image. There are different versions of it, but the idea is that everybody has to basically be doing improvement rather than firefighting and all those other things that you get sidetracked into. Okay, let's another part of this monitoring and evaluating outcomes and capability. Here I'm going to refer to a book that hasn't actually been published yet, but I think it's coming out sometime this year. It's called The 3D Workplace, and it's written by a couple of people, one of which, James Lascelles, did our level 3 program and worked for a consultancy that's used the LCS for several years. And this is essentially their model of how they implement it. And one thing he mentions in the book is that what the framework provides is an objective measure of the hands-on, action-oriented improvement capability in the organization. So this is his observation from using it in many organizations. Because what he's saying is that embedding CI requires a new level of capability, and that's going to be embedded in the people actually do the work. And what they found, and when it's embedded, it becomes part of the culture. So this is an important role that we've found that accreditation can have, because the LCS focuses on the individual as well as the organization. It gives that sort of certification and that reward. He says it measures true capability because of the way that we insist that there's going to be some practical project as part of the assessment. So you can demonstrate that individuals have got a pre-proven competence in doing things. And it's obviously action orientated with the idea that there are actual tangible benefits and outcomes through these projects to require certification. So this is one that I say I've borrowed from the experience, but to me it seems an important way of how accreditation can help in this sort of monitor and evaluate outcomes and capability. Another piece of the jigsaw is the engaged employees. And essentially this is one I think has grown in importance, because we realized many years ago, you've got to address the what's in it for me question when it comes to getting people to get engaged with the continuous improvement effort. And what accreditation offers is obviously a clear framework for personal development for those people involved, either full-time in a continuous improvement career. It gives them a route to develop their competency. As I've said, it's a global qualification now, which again is important. People can see they're part of a broader network. The university linkage is important still. This adds an awful lot of value to a certificate that's got some endorsement from a reputable university. That's the sort of high perceived value element, and it offers other elements and we've got practitioner membership of a sort of our community plus continual professional development, other things that give people this incentive to keep going. So this is the one that I think is we've sort of woken up to in the last few years, but you've got to address this question for people, tap into the sort of intrinsic motivation of people to want to do this every day when they come into work. I was I'm reminded of one of our accredited customers. Well, don't do this anymore, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, but every 6 months they had they called it a graduation ceremony in their headquarters in the city. And they had, these were mainly 1C people who came in to receive their certificates from the chief operating officer, who he'd come down and make it a bit of spiel and say how important it was to him, massively important for these people. And then they do a little talk about what they did, and there was sandwiches and photos, all this sort of stuff. Really was impressive to see how this motivated and people really value these sort of things. I think they're doing them virtually now, not quite the same as the physical things. Hopefully, maybe next year, because I'm normally invited to these as well. It's always great to see people. We'll get these going again. But reward and recognition has certainly become a key component of how do you get people engaged, how do you tap into that intrinsic, develop that intrinsic motivation. We did some research a couple of years ago, just asking CI managers about various factors, and just asked them to agree with statements about certain aspects. And this one, accredited training provides a tangible rewards they appreciate. Again, that was reinforced by a large proportion had agreement with that particular statement. So I think this was a lesson for us. You've got to focus on that element as well. Another piece of the jigsaw was dedicated, well-resourced implementation team and create and communicate a sense of urgency. Well, I think the actual impact of being accredited becomes important. And what we've found that the act of accreditation tends to send a powerful signal to staff that the organization is serious about this. It can kickstart and reinvigorate momentum as well. It's about also creating and maintaining a standard. And I think there's sort of a carrot and stick element of this, where you can, because it's important for organizations to have a consistent approach as work across organizational physical boundaries. And you normally have a central team perhaps to manage that. And I think the other thing where it can create a sense of urgency is because of the insistence that the assessment should have some workplace application element to it. So there's not just a question of having a certificate, you've passed a test, you've got to have demonstrated that you can apply it, that creates that sort of sense of urgency that you're actually going to do something. Let's look at a couple of other questions now. I'm going to launch another poll in terms of what are the advantages of accredited training. So let's click that. Hold on a minute. So this one asks you to select on what do you think the main advantage of accredited training is. Is it about promoting the offering across boundaries, credibility, and independent endorsement, motivation, take-up, and structured rigor and guidelines? So have a think and choose one of those you think could be on the list. Okay, let's end that. We've got pretty much unanimous there. Main advantage is to motivate and encourage take-up. Now we asked managers of CI programs what they thought that were the main advantages. And yeah, this was the top two were motivation and encouraging take-up. So we're pretty much on the button there. Plus credibility in independent endorsement. This we've found does become an important factor. Often internal teams don't get the sort of recognition they need, and sometimes it can help politically, if you like, to get someone else to say, yeah, this is good stuff. But other factors, the other factor, structure and rigor. So it does add a bit more structure and rigor to the whole approach. But there's other things as well which were important. But you're right, this motivation, encourage, take up is the key one, because as I said, we've got to get people engaged and tap into their own intrinsic motivation to want to do this when they come into work each day. Again, we asked in our survey a couple of years ago, we asked about other factors. One, interestingly, this one, does it contribute to overall productivity improvements? This is obviously not, this is just an opinion rather than evidence-based, but the general belief is that accredited training does have a role because it incentivizes use. You've got the project element of on application. So it does have a role in contributing to higher productivity. This is something where we could do, I think, do some further research on this, but it's an important factor at the moment in finding ways, especially in the current business environment, to see how we can increase people's productivity. Okay, so that's sort of my initial tour of the jigsaw, and there's some good linkage there between what accreditation can, or how accreditation can help in put those pieces of the jigsaw in place. I'll briefly talk about how you become accredited. Obviously, an organization that becomes accredited becomes technically an accredited certifier of lean competency, and they then issue certificates of lean competency to people who they train. So that's the sort of state that an accredited organization comes to. And what's accredited is what we call the lean training system. It's all the various components that enable effective lean training to be delivered. So you've got the whole context, course script descriptions and outcomes, material, assessment, delivery, people, support, admin. Now this could be one course, it could be a whole center of excellence. The point is, this is what we will look for, and the whole submission process is about evidencing that a good system is in place, or a good program is in place that can deliver the right outcomes aligned to the framework. In terms of who's suitable for it, well, I think it's pretty much any. There's no real sectorial difference. Any business or any sector. If you're going to become accredited, then you will need a critical mass of staff we train. Really, it's not cost effective if just a very small organization. Obviously, consultants can be of any side, and it's all sectors and any sort of single or multi-location. I think before you start the process, you need to have some continuous improvement, lean capability in terms of a methodology. As I mentioned, have you got a methodology in place, your defined approach for doing this? Probably a program in place or in development, say one course or several courses. You've got people to deliver it, whether internally or using external people and support mechanisms to make it happen. But then you could be new to lean CI or experienced and mature. It can fit either model there. The third one, probably a bit more subjective, is readiness. Are you ready to go through this in terms of commitment and strategic intent around lean? Obviously, we're looking. You would ideally want the leaders and the middle managers to be supporting this. But as I said, the sustainability is largely about having this leadership drive. Reasonably stable, which is maybe harder in the current world. But you don't need too many distractions. And I'd probably say a positive perspective about lean, which I think you've got to lead with the positive side about creating capacity and adding value, rather than just see it as a tool to take out waste and everything, which obviously is part of what you're doing. But it's largely about, I think, the positive messages that you can put forward on that. And the process itself, 6 main stages, sort of a planning stage, then you register. Most of the work is going to be in putting together a portfolio of evidence that demonstrates you've got an effective system. The world record is about 2 weeks to do this whole process. Can take a bit longer, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's not months and months and months. It's sort of around months, 6 weeks, I would say. We go through a review process on this, check it's okay. When it's completed, we issue a checklist. Then we have a sign-off meeting, and then you're accredited. So that's the broad stages. Obviously, this is 80% of it is actually putting the submission together. Whoops. So that's it really in terms of the main points I was going to cover in terms of the jigsaw and how accreditation links into that. To summarize, I've sort of put ticks where I think the impact is strong, and I've put sort of 3 ticks on things like it helps with this structured methodology and project management. 3 on this, you've got to help develop this, your own version of lean, this contingent approach. 3 ticks on getting employees engaged, and also on having a flexible and adaptable accreditation approach that fits in with what you're doing, but also a few double ticks on urgency and mobilization and so forth. I've deliberately haven't put a clear tick on that one, because that's I wouldn't say accreditation can impact that, but that's clearly something that has to be there, as also consultation with broader stakeholders, suppliers, customers, and so forth. So our view of accreditation after about 15 years of doing it is it can address many of the key issues around sustainability that you'll be looking to get in place if you're starting something or trying to keep something going and sustain it, because obviously that's the goal, is to create this culture where this becomes just part of the way we do things around here. Again, we asked the managers, does accredited training help foster an improvement culture? And again, the general belief was, yeah, this was an important part of that. Again, a positive point for accreditation. So the overall impact, I think, is, if you look at your continuous improvement method times its acceptance, is essentially what is going to create your effectiveness. And this is where I think the LCS is playing a big role in terms of getting people to accept it, engage people, motivate and reward people. So I think that's the a key takeaway in terms of how the LCS helps the acceptance of whatever methodology you've chosen, because that's what's going to make it effectiveness, going to make it effective. Okay, well, that's all I wanted to talk about. If we've got any questions, please, you can either unmute yourself and ask, or write something in the chat. Anyone got any questions from that?